Let's get right to my interview with Bill Clinton. I met the former president at the Clintons' home in Chappaqua, New York. He was gearing up for the Clinton Global Initiative, which starts Monday. This used to be an annual conference, but hasn't been held since 2016. The 76-year-old Clinton is energized that it's been reborn, and he's energized, as always, by American politics. President Clinton, pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
When you look at the midterms, do you think because of abortion and because of the passage of a few very important bills, could Biden break the historical pattern of the midterms going badly?
Absolutely. But we could hold both these houses. But we have to say the right things. And we have to note the Republicans always close well. Why? Because they find some new way to scare the living daylights out of swing voters about something. That's what they did in 2021, where they made critical race theory sound worse than smallpox. And it wasn't being taught in any public schools in America, but they didn't care. They just scare people. And at the end, the break point in American politics is not much different than it was in the 90s. That is, you still have to get those people. It's just that there's so many fewer. Because as the parties have gone more ideological and clear and somehow psychically intolerant, they pull more and more of people toward the extremes. But there's still some people hanging on there who are really trying to think and trying to understand what's going on. So I think that's very important. And
the way Tony Blair puts it is he says that, I think I'm paraphrasing correctly, that you and he understood that you had to appeal to peoples on cultural issues to reassure them that you weren't a crazy-eyed radical. And then they would be open to listening to your economic policies, which were going to help them. But if they thought you were somehow alien, they were just not going to be listening.
That's right. For example, and it applies to other things. I mean, when we succeeded in breaking the filibuster and getting the assault weapons ban passed, I said, look, I grew up in a hunting culture. You know, I had a 22 when I was 10 years old, a 410 shotgun, a tiny one when I was 14. I don't want to do anything to interfere with your right to hunt, sports shoot, or protect yourself, especially if you live in a rural area where the police response time might be pretty extended. But if I keep that commitment, wouldn't you like to help a lot of these kids that are being shot down and bribed by shootings live? Wouldn't you like to do that? We need your help here. And that's what I did. I didn't call them killers. I didn't, talk about the NRA. I talked about people. There aren't so many of them, but you just need a few to flip from one side or the other, and you've got a healthy governing majority. It is hard, and it's much harder now than when I did it, and it was hard then. So, but what Biden reasoned was, I just have to keep at it, and I'll either get something done or I won't, but I can't win a word war with these guys. I've got to win based on things that will help people. And now you see he's getting a little more robust in his rhetoric, but it's because he's got a platform to stand on that will help other people's lives. Politics is about other people. And the problem with the culture war is that it always tries to turn it back to the politicians. What's wrong with them? And this is what the press has to guard against, because if you have to worry about daily ratings, the drama of two people duking it out is far more profoundly effective. But it always, in the end, winds up helping the right, because it's harder to build a barn than it is to kick one down. And then when you build it, you got to explain what you built and why it's a good thing to put your animals in your barn. And it's harder, but it's really worth doing.
I'm struck by how, when you watch the Republicans campaigning for this midterm, it's almost all about cancel culture, about critical race theory. It's about what your kids are going to be taught in school. Ron DeSantis' fundraising emails are all about that. Will it work?
No, but look, he's sending Venezuelans who were coming here freeing the successor to Hugo Chavez's disaster because the guy doesn't want to go and he has no economic answers, right? So he sends them to Martha's Vineyard. Why? Because Martha's Vineyard is this symbol of where the elite goes to vacation. And for people who know more on the East Coast, it was also the first place that welcomed Black professionals and business people from the South to come and live on equal terms in a community that was largely created for religious reflection and study. So it's, that's what's going on. And I don't know what Massachusetts is going to do, but I'll bet that they will make those people feel at home.
Next on GPS, we'll move to the world stage with President Clinton, and we'll talk about Vladimir Putin, his war in Ukraine, and how the fall of the Soviet Union and the immediate aftermath might have influenced what is happening today. Mark of Putin's war on Ukraine, and despite Kyiv's recent successes fighting back against the invader, there is no real end in sight. I wanted to hear President Clinton's take on the war and how events 30 years ago might have started it all in motion.
Let me ask you about Russia, the war in Ukraine. You know, there are a lot of people who argue that it's all your fault, that the reason that Russia has invaded Ukraine is that the United States, by expanding NATO, provoked that. The largest or most significant expansion of NATO took place on your watch. What do you say to them?
You're wrong. And here's why. When I did what I did, I offered Russia not only a special partnership with NATO, but the prospect of eventual membership in NATO, arguing that our biggest security problems in the future were going to come from non-state actors or from authoritarian states selling chemical, biological, and nuclear capacity to terrorist groups. And a lot of that happened. And that we should do this together. But I looked at him and I said, do you really believe I would use an air base in Poland to bomb Russia? And he said, no, but a lot of little old ladies in Western Russia do, because their historic memory includes Hitler and their grandparents' memories included Napoleon. I said, okay, I concede that. But our historic memory includes the notion that your greatest days were under Ivan, Peter the Great, and Catherine the Great. In other words, when you could control your neighbors. And people don't want to be controlled anymore. They want to be free to chart their own course. I'll never forget the first time a man with impeccable military credentials, the warden of Rhodes House, who was Viscount Montgomery's aide de camp in World War II, said, you're going to have to leave Vietnam for the same reason we had to leave Nigeria. We left Nigeria. There was a horrible war. 3 million people died, but we had to go, and you're going to have to go. And I said, why? He said, because they don't want you. People want to chart their own course. They have to feel secure in their own identities. Then they have to have the courage to work with others. And this is not easy psychologically, and there are dueling historical narratives. But to go back to your original case, I am more convinced today than I was then that we did the right thing. When President Putin made no secret of the fact that he thought the dissolution of the Soviet Union was a great tragedy in world history, he made no secret of the fact that he thought President Khrushchev or Premier Khrushchev had done a terrible, terrible job in giving Crimea to Ukraine, and that he only did it as a gift, assuming Ukraine would be always part of the Soviet Union. So, and I remember talking to him about this. I said, I got a deal with Russia to respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And I got the British to go along and NATO to go along, and we all signed the agreement. He said, yes, you did. But he said, Yeltsin never got it confirmed in the parliament because, they did. They had all these nationalists there. He said he never got it confirmed in the parliament, and therefore I'm not bound by it, and I don't agree with it. I mean, I don't see how we could be surprised by all this. But I think the fact that the Ukrainians are willing to stand up is encouraging. And who's providing a lot of those weapons and training? NATO. And what does Finland want to do? Join NATO. So I'm sorry, I just disagree. I think we did the right thing at the right time. And if we hadn't have done it, this crisis might have occurred even sooner. But you can't tell people, you're supposed to tell the Poles they should live for the rest of eternity with the insecurity that Russia won't try to come after them again, or the Hungarians, or all the others, the Baltic states. Really, after what they did they ever want to be in the Soviet Union? And the Czech Republic, of course, was the most democratic of all and the best managed from the fall of the Cold War for the next 10 years. The fall of the Berlin Wall for the next 10 years.
Next on GPS, I'll ask Bill Clinton about the existential challenges he says the world faces today. On Monday, after a 5-year absence, the Clinton Global Initiative will hold an annual meeting. In attendance will be world leaders, Hollywood stars, corporate titans, NGO heads, and activists from around the world. They will meet to discuss many of the problems that plague society and commit to help solving them. Clinton explained that he, Hillary, and Chelsea were bringing back the meeting because the world faces an urgent and historic moment, including several existential challenges.
I want to ask you about the Clinton Global Initiative and many of the issues that you're dealing with there. One of the issues that you've talked about is inclusive growth and the difficulty of getting that kind of inclusive growth. And it feels like this is so much at the heart of the inequality, the political tensions. Is there a simple solution to this? People have been trying to do it, but the problem seems to be in a knowledge economy, in the world we're in now, the gains do tend to accrue to people who are educated, people who are connected.
They tend to accrue. So you need public policy and private action. Businesses, NGOs, to figure out how to take advantage of the good things about the modern world and extinguish the bad. I'll just give you an example. One of our partners, who sadly just passed away, was Sir Fazl Abed, who founded BRAC. And BRAC and another one of our partners, Muhammad Yunus, and the Grameen Bank, they're the biggest microcredit banks in the world. And they started in Bangladesh. Bangladesh has had terrible political problems. As you know, it's been deeply divided between two dynasties headed by two women. One lost her father, one lost her husband in political violence, and then their successors. It grew at 6% a year. 6% a year. Why? Because they proved that if the ground was thick enough with small loans to people who had talent and the willingness to work, you could still build an economy that works. That's the most successful example in the world I'm aware of. But I could give you lots of other examples. If you look at...
Tell me about the US, because you know that people are going to say, well, what about inclusive growth in America? How do we get it so that...
Okay, well, so one of the things we have to do is do what made growth more inclusive in the 1990s. We need to have more microcredit in America. The Grameen Bank has opened a branch in New York City, and it's working. Poor people are paying back their loans, and they're, making money.
Let me ask you about another issue you guys are going to take up at CGI, the refugees. And one of the things that I think the right has hammered at with regard to the Democratic Party and President Biden is this issue of refugees coming into the United States. And I think it's fair to say that the asylum system seems to be broken. This was meant to be a system that allowed people who were in desperate circumstances. And now what you have is a lot of people who are essentially economic migrants
Yes.
coming in, essentially gaming the system, using the asylum way to get in. Isn't it true that there has to be some order placed on this, some control?
I agree with that. That is, there is a limit to how many migrants any society can take without severe disruption and assistance. And our system is based much more on an assumption that things would be more normal. For example, as long as I can remember, we've had an immigration system. We've given green cards to people from other countries who had valuable skills that we needed. And it generally had a lot of support until somebody felt their economic interests threatened. When I was a boy, when I was a young man even, Mexican citizens moved freely back and forth across the Rio Grande River and did agricultural work. And it worked for people. NAFTA happened at a time when there was increasing industrialization. So everybody knew that was going to happen, but it did displace jobs. El Paso lost 6,600 jobs when the manufacturing of jeans went across the border. But they supported it because they knew that over the long run, they had to find a way to live together and work together. So this is, it's an old story, but now you just got the largest number of refugees since World War II because of Syria and now Ukraine and other problems in the middle. What happened in Venezuela had more than 2 million refugees pouring into first Colombia and then to nearby countries. Has created unprecedented new challenges. And meanwhile, it provides opportunities for stunts like Governor Abbott sending his refugees to some place that he thinks is advocating for a broad-minded policy it doesn't have to live with. And then Governor DeSantis sending those people to Martha's Vineyard was amazing. That may come back to haunt him a little bit.
We will be back with the end of my conversation with President Bill Clinton.
The great political trend of our time remains populism, which is still, well, popular in many places around the globe. America is not immune, of course. Look at Donald Trump and his hold on the Republican Party. I wanted to hear President Clinton's take.
A lot of people look at these various populist movements and say it all comes out of the excesses of the neoliberal era, the 90s, when we had a lot of growth, we had a lot of markets opening up, free markets, free trade, but it left behind some people, and it left behind particularly the white working class. Now, you presided over this incredible period of growth in the United States. Do you think there's something to that critique?
There is, but let's look what happened. And no one ever talks about, and although we've finally got two great articles on the sharp decline in poverty over the last 35 years in America, because we keep adding on to what's working and stopping what doesn't, which is what government should really do and what anybody does with their lives. But the truth is, there were problems with a market-oriented economy where whenever you change the technology, and we moved into IT-related business, there's always an advantage to the people who get there first. And the people who get there first are those with the money, with the ideas, with the access to technology. And then society has to catch up. And the real problem is that in the United States and several other countries, there wasn't enough done to do the catching up. That's all true. And that's what my campaign in 1992 was all about. That's why, you know, when I left office, we'd moved 100 times more people out of poverty into the middle class than my predecessors, because I understood that. It's the only time since the end of World War II when the percentage-wise, the incomes at the bottom 20% rose slightly more than the top 20. Not that I wanted to make them poor, but if you look at a graph of, let's say that their most successful president was Reagan, because it was the first time we'd ever been on a deficit-fueled sugar high in peacetime. But in every quintile, except the top 5% really, they did better in the 1990s, the American people did, with more shared prosperity. So I think that's a legitimate critique, but it doesn't really explain the rise of Viktor Orban in Hungary and the transformation of a young, sort of more progressive-oriented, open politician to a person who ran against Muslims and immigration generally. And that's something that happens to the mindset of a people, and a skilled politician can make the most of it, and one who doesn't want to follow the traditional practice in democracy, which is term limits for chief executives, but who wants to stay forever will do what they can to make the most of that.
Why are we so prone to this cultural populism at this moment?
Because the world got on fire at the same time from economic disorder, starting with a crash, and rising inequality, and a wildfire of culture wars. So what happened in America is we should have been the best positioned to resist it. We didn't, but 4 years later we did. And you see what happened. If you compare, for example, Hillary's concession speech to what Trump did, it's daylight and dark. Why? Because we actually believe, those of us who don't support negative populism, divisive populism, that you can be an inclusive populist or an inclusive conservative as long as you believe in the fundamental principles of democracy: majority rule, minority rights, shared decision-making, restraint by the rule of law. And so that's really the battle we're fighting here in America, but it's going on all over the world, as you pointed out. And this new world got off to a good start with the collapse of communism and with the rise of information technology, with all of its economic and other potential. But it was bound to have growing pains. I mean, there were bound to be people, as they always are, who wanted to take advantage of the opportunities of democracy and then pull up the ladder behind them when they got in. It's an old, old story. There's a reason America is the longest lasting democracy in history. They're hard to preserve. They're hard to treasure, because when they're not particularly functional, we all live with it, and all we can do is vote for something else, we think.
I have to ask you this in conclusion. Ken Starr just passed away. This is the special prosecutor, independent counsel for Whitewater, never filed a charge on Whitewater, but turned your presidency, the second term, upside down. Do you have any thoughts, any reflections?
Well, I read the obituary, and I realized that his family loved him, and I think that's something to be grateful for. And when your life is over, that's all there is to say. But I was taught not to talk about people that I have nothing to say, except I'm glad he died with the love of his families.
President Clinton, pleasure to have you on the program.
Thanks.